which is why it has worked diligently to enable the protection of civilians, even as Hamas seeks deliberately to endanger them. To deny Israel this basic right would be to suggest, shockingly, that the most fundamental right afforded to all states should be withheld from one. This is an unthinkable outcome that would tell Israeli citizens and the hostages that they are not deserving of protection, of life itself, and tells the Israeli state that it will be treated unequally in a manner that is at odds with the most basic of legal principles. Israel is acutely aware of the large number of civilians that are concentrated in Rafah. It is also acutely aware of Hamas's efforts to use these civilians as a shield. That is why its battalions are present there. That is why its rockets are there. That is why hostages are there. We do not wish harm to these civilians, as Hamas does. That is precisely why Israel is taking steps to try and contend with the massive complexity that such a situation presents. That is why there has not been a large-scale assault on Rafah, but rather specific, limited and localized operations prefaced with evacuation efforts and support for humanitarian activities. Does Israel face complex operational challenges in Gaza? Certainly. But can we imagine a situation where a state does not take military action to protect its civilians when they are under fire? And can we imagine a court of law telling a state that the law prevents it from defending itself from attack? This is simply untenable. When I last stood at this podium in January, Israeli hostages had been in captivity for almost 100 days. At the time, this seemed inconceivable. Yet the hostages have now been in captivity for over 7 months. More than 130 children, women and men, including the sick and elderly, have now been held in Gaza for 224 days, incommunicado and in inhumane conditions. Among them is 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg-Polin. Hirsch was abducted from the Nova Music Festival in Re'im, severely injured. On 25th April 2024, Hamas released a video
sounds
of
like
Hirsch.
Sir Keir Statis's Starmer yesterday.
Which was
This
blown
includes
off by Hamas terrorists.
Little Billy. He has a glass eye and a wooden leg.
Needs medical treatment.
Fucking scumbags,
At
man.
least
Fucking dripping
36 of those who were taken
people's
hostage on October
personal
7th
stories
have been
over
confirmed dead,
fucking
and
people's
their
screens
bodies
for their
are
own
still held in the Gaza
propaganda
Strip.
reasons, man.
Among them
Scumbags.
are Yossi Sharabi, a 53-year-old father of 3, and Itai Svirsky, who is 38-year-old. Both of them were kidnapped from their homes in Be'eri. On 14 January 2024...
if you would like to carry on watching the proceedings live, then do tune into the BBC News website. You can see the ways to do that there on the screen. I just want to cross now to Anna Holligan, who is our correspondent at The Hague. Anna, just to take us through the key points of what we've been hearing just over the last 20 minutes or so.
It remains unclear how many more innocent victims have been killed at the hands of Hamas. Simply put, this situation is unconscionable. It is unbearable for the parents who watch videos of their young daughters bruised and bleeding paraded before cheering crowds in Gaza, and who have heard harrowing accounts told by survivors released from Gaza of the torture and sexual violence they suffered at the hand of their captors. and it is intolerable for a nation obligated to defend its citizens and wishing for their return. This court has called for the immediate release of the hostages, but to no avail. It is Israel's right and obligation to defend them and all its citizens from the evil that was unleashed on them on 7th October and since then. Any state would do the same. Mr. President, members of the court, I next turn to the second fact that must be kept in mind.
I think we see
Hamas,
a kind of...
with whom Israel is engaging in this armed conflict, is not a party to these proceedings. Israel is engaged in an intense armed conflict with a ruthless jihadist terrorist organization, one that is not only targeting Israeli civilians, but is also using Palestinian civilians to shield itself, in utter disregard for their lives or for the law. By exploiting the Genocide Convention, South Africa is suggesting a convoluted reading of international law, under which any armed conflict could be brought before the court. It seeks, once again, to obtain provisional measures that would bind only Israel and not its adversary. The absurd result would be that Israel would be denied its inherent right to defend itself. Hamas, for its part, would remain free to continue committing its horrific crimes. The purpose of the Genocide Convention is not to have the court supervise the conduct of armed hostilities by parties to the conflict, by the assertion of the genocide.
Morning, Doberman.
Rather, the convention, and subsequently this court's jurisdiction,
this morning, so
is limited to the grave crime of genocide. I am compelled to restate once again that there is a tragic war going on, but there is no genocide. Yet, particularly at the provisional measure stage, when the evidentiary threshold is such that the applicant is not required to provide proof of its allegations or the existence of specific intent to commit genocide, there is a danger that the court will find itself engaged in the micromanagement of operational aspects of an armed conflict. This is what South Africa has been asking the court to do. Judge Ad hoc Barak warned precisely of this danger when the court handed out its decision on South Africa's third request for provisional measures. He observed that, I quote, "The court has accepted South Africa's invitation to become the micromanager of an armed conflict and use the Genocide Convention as an excuse to rule on the basis of international humanitarian law. Managing an armed conflict under the Genocide Convention is a dangerous endeavor, especially when one of the belligerents is not a party to the convention. This remains true when considering South Africa's fourth request." Mr. President, members of the court, this brings me to third basic fact that must not be ignored. South Africa purports to come before you, yet again, as a guardian of humanity. In fact, it has a clear ulterior motive when it asks you to order Israel to stay away from Rafah and to withdraw all its troops from Gaza. It does so in order to obtain military advantage for its ally, Hamas, which it does not wish to see defeated. It is this reason that South Africa continues to abuse the Genocide Convention, this court, and the procedure of provisional measures. Just 6 days ago, on 11 May 2024, only a day after it submitted the present request for additional provisional measures, South Africa hosted a Hamas delegation in Johannesburg. South Africa's foreign minister herself met with Hamas representatives. They did not use the meeting to urge Hamas to release the hostages, to stop targeting Israeli civilians, to cease using human shields. to cease operating from within and nearby hospitals, UN facilities, and other protected sites. They are apparently met to discuss their continued campaign against Israel in the court and on the ground. Mr. President, members of the court, South Africa is not interested in the truth, nor is it interested in law or justice. Once again, it is exploiting the court and its authority to issue provisional measures. It is in no rush to reach the merits of this case when it will have to substantiate its baseless claims with evidence that simply does not exist. Israel, for its part, has shown nothing but respect for the judicial process and for the law more generally. As the court will recall, on 28 April 2024, Israel provided the court with a lengthy report detailing inter alia the numerous steps that Israel had actively and effectively taken to address the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, consistent with the court's previous orders. Rather than first responding to Israel's report, South Africa rushed to submit yet another request for provisional measures, its fourth, for fear that Hamas's last significant stronghold will fall. Hamas itself has repeatedly rejected every offer for a ceasefire. On 25 April 2024, 18 states called upon Hamas to release immediately the hostages still being held in Gaza. They said, and I quote, "We emphasize that the deal on the table to release the hostages would bring an immediate and prolonged ceasefire in Gaza that would facilitate a surge of additional necessary humanitarian assistance to be delivered throughout Gaza and lead to the credible end of hostilities." 4 days ago, on 13 May 2024, the United States National Security Advisor noted in the same vein that, and I quote, "There could be a ceasefire tomorrow if Hamas simply released women, wounded, and elderly hostages." Israel put a forward-leaning proposal on the table. The world should be calling on Hamas to come back to the table and accept a deal. South Africa spoke yesterday about rebuilding a viable Palestinian society. Yet, South Africa's actions speak louder than its words. By its actions, it is clear that South Africa wishes to see Hamas remain in control of the Palestinians in Gaza and to destine them to misery. It is Israel that wishes to see a different future to Gaza, one in which Palestinians and Israelis can both live in peace. Hamas, the genocidal terrorist organization, will stop at nothing to prevent that. Mr. President, members of the court, this brings me to the fourth fact that the court must not lose sight of. As is the case with all armed conflicts, incidents involving alleged violations of the rules regulating the conduct of hostilities may occur. This reality is not unique to Israel. No state is infallible. Israel's independent and robust legal system addresses all allegations of misconduct, including in the current hostilities. They must not be thrown before this court in the form of facts and conclusions, and as evidence of something they are not. Armed conflict is not a synonym for genocide. South Africa mentions some individual incidents reported in the media and attempts to present them as evidence of unlawful policies. Yet, exceptional incidents are just that, exceptional. They do not evidence a policy of illegal behavior, let alone a policy of genocide. And then also cannot be cited as fact until a proper examination is carried out. Not every media report reflects facts or incidents correctly or in their full context. Israel has been and remains committed to acting in accordance with its international legal obligations, including those under international humanitarian law and the Genocide Convention. Israel has in place the necessary mechanisms to examine and investigate allegations of wrongdoing by its military forces and to ensure accountability for violations of the law. Information about these mechanisms and their activities since the commencement of hostilities has been provided by Israel in both the report of 26 February 2024 and the report of 28 April 2024. It bears repeating before the court today that since the beginning of the hostilities, 55 criminal investigations have been opened by the military advocate general with respect to incidents that raise prima facie reasonable suspicion of criminal misconduct. In addition, the fact-finding and assessment mechanism, a permanent, independent and professional mechanism in charge of examining exceptional incidents, is in the process of addressing hundreds of incidents from the current conflict. With respect to various public statements, as I stressed in January before the court, the Israeli legal system knows how to draw a line between statements that are troubling and even obscene, but still fall within the right of freedom of speech in a democratic society, and those statements which go beyond that right. Israel's reports have also outlined the steps taken by Israel's law enforcement agencies to examine dozens of statements made in the context of the current hostilities in order to ascertain whether legal steps are warranted. It was recently decided that some cases justify the promotion of criminal proceedings. At the same time, since the outset of these proceedings, South Africa has consistently cherry-picked statements or taken others out of context in an attempt to attribute to Israel the intent to commit genocide, taking advantage of the law evidentiary threshold at the provisional measure stage.
Come on, man. We don't need to see
That's so in
fucking
the present
little
request
dead
as well.
fucking dying. That's
Attributing to Israel alleged genocidal aims and acts based on statements clearly calling for victory over
Jeremy, that's a
Hamas
cunt.
and
That's
for its
well
destruction.
fucking more palatable than fucking little dead
Israel has made
babies
repeatedly
in it.
clear that the policy and instructions
What?
for
Off Al
conducting the
Jazeera, you
hostilities
fucking
stem
scumbags.
from the decisions of the Ministerial
Fucking
Committee on
Roberto
National Security
fucking
Affairs and the
Jobby
War Cabinet,
Robinson, fucking
and
dripping
not
dead
from various
grannies.
social media accounts or interviews.
Fucking lying in the street,
As Ms.
bleeding out
Kaplan
over
Turjaman
this
will
one.
explain,
Ah,
the decision
fuck
of the
you.
Israeli
You know
cabinet
what, man? I'm
found
about to boycott.
leave no doubt that South Africa's
I'm about to
allegations
boycott Al
regarding
Jazeera now.
genocide are completely and utterly baseless.
I'm
Israel's
deliberately
law
not
enforcement
looking at that wee bit.
authorities
Well, it's wee kind of
also
colours
act to
that kind of
counter
more-
Israeli
It's
protesters
disgusting, man.
who blocked the transfer of aid from
Oh,
Israel
no,
to
I know
Gaza.
I'm getting fixated over it.
The Israeli police secures
Why the
coordinated
fuck are they
convoys
showing
during their
little
passage
dead
in Israel.
babies, man? That's disgusting.
With respect to the incident of May 13, during which protesters caused damage to aid trucks, the Israeli police is prioritizing the investigation, which was assigned to a special investigation unit. It has already resulted in the investigation of several suspects and witnesses. The authorities are acting in this regard and will continue to act in order to investigate and prosecute, if appropriate, and to ensure the continued effective
Right,
and
put your
efficient
dead bodies
transfer
away, man.
of humanitarian
That's all right.
aid.
Fucking stump cunts getting locked up.
As part of a lessons learned process,
Dying
an
babies,
improved
man.
mechanism was adopted by the police
I'm a
and
very
the
big
IDF
delicate
to
this
ensure the
morning.
safety of the convoys. Finally,
I see dead body. I don't want to see
even during
babies
hostilities,
dying. Thank you.
the door of
Fucking Al
Israel's High
Jazeera,
Court of
you
Justice, a central pillar of Israel's robust and independent legal system, are open to those who seek to challenge the actions of Israel's government. This includes non-governmental organizations,
What the
NGOs,
fuck was that?
and
He's
individuals
standing on that.
who are not Israeli
Really
citizens and
impressive, man.
residents, if they
like
are
a map of the
potentially
world, but
affected
in
by
Euro.
such actions. In fact, Israel's High Court of Justice is currently reviewing a petition submitted by a number of Israeli NGOs concerning the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip.
What do they call it? Mosaic 4?
The court is reviewing the compliance of the Israeli government's policy with both international humanitarian law and Israeli law.
My lord.
In its response to the petition,
I think
the
they
state
hope
has
to bore
submitted
cunts into
extensive
submission.
briefs and has participated in 2 public
Why
oral
use
hearings
a
before
million
a
and one
senior
words when
3-judge panel.
what you're saying can be communicated?
It has presented in
I
detail
think
the
people will
effort it is
respect you
undertaking
more
to
if you just go,
alleviate the humanitarian situation.
my shit stinks.
An additional
I rest
statement
my case, Your
will be
Honour.
submitted to the court within the next few days
Instead of
concerning, inter alia, the operation in Rafah. As I stated before this court in January 2024, even when the cannons war in Gaza, the law is not silent. Israel's legal system and its domestic mechanisms are a testament to this.
on the statins, get you
Mr. President, members of the court, let me now say something about the weakness of South Africa's allegations. Its council berated Israel yesterday for casting aspersions
an
at what it
education for
called
me, because
credible information provided by South
I've
Africa.
heard of them. I can't even remember.
The sad
specifically,
truth is
but
that South
definitely
Africa
heard people
cites
on
hateful
them.
social media accounts and unsubstantiated
Something
news reports in
cholesterol,
support of its
Let's see,
claims.
you get bad cholesterol.
Surely this cannot pass. An additional
Never
flaw
looked
in
at
this
it,
regard
but
is
it
South
sounds like a
Africa's
gravy
heavy
train, that.
reliance on documents prepared by
You
third
get
parties or under
invest
the
in
auspices
statin
of the
companies.
United Nations, when these cannot be said to
man,
constitute
for the same.
sufficient evidence of a reliable quality. Indeed, the court has itself had occasion to observe that UN reports may only be of such quality, I quote, to the extent that they are of probative value and are corroborated, if necessary, by other credible sources. The court moreover stated that, and I quote, the precise evidentiary value accorded to any report, including those produced by United Nations entities, also depends on the methodology and the amount of research underlying its preparation. It is important to clarify, Israel does not underestimate the reports of the UN and other sources. We study them, draw conclusions and lessons in the appropriate cases.
People influencing people's
However,
medical fucking
statements from
decisions
such reports should not be accepted automatically,
online.
especially in a complex combat reality. These words of caution are of particular significance in the present case, as the materials cited by South Africa have been prepared without access to relevant and necessary information, including that held by Israel, and often without any attempt to access such information. They frequently rely on Hamas sources or on those subject to Hamas intimidation.
Especially when you're getting militant and
One striking example, which gives serious cause for alarm, is that even UN OCHA, which has so far parroted information generated by Hamas-run agencies in Gaza regarding fatalities, has recently started to accept that the information coming out of Gaza is flawed.
Pandemic, COVID stuff. And then
It highlighted that more than 10,000 of the fatalities declared by Hamas are unnamed and thus unverifiable.
Just rebranding himself.
Concurrently, it revised dramatically the number of verifiable fatalities of women and children fatalities to approximately half than was previously presented, and stopped parroting the baseless claim that 70% of the casualties are women and children.
Rebranding yourself constantly,
it turns out that the data that the UN were using and that South Africa has presented to this court as true was wrong. While the number of overall fatalities has not changed, the breakdown is
What's
crucial.
this guy still talking? I swear to God, he is
Hamas has been concealing the number of militants in its unverified lists of Palestinian casualties. Hamas's lists also contain persons who died from reasons unrelated to IDF actions, such as fire of terrorist organizations,
I haven't fucking slept properly.
and show many irregularities in reported age, gender, and ID numbers.
I'm not too far away from Greg's.
In this way, an armed conflict can easily be portrayed as genocide.
Oh, good shit in the kitchen actually as well, Matt.
As we have stated, every civilian death is a tragedy. Moreover, overall fatality counts during a war are not
Hurry
in and of
up, Jew
themselves
McJewstein.
evidence
What's your
of
point,
unlawful
caller?
conduct under international law. Once again,
Hello?
the facts
Hello,
matter.
McFly. What's your fucking... I feel like I'm speaking to my ma
South
here,
Africa
man.
has not missed an
Fucking hearing a
opportunity
million
to
of man
make
words.
outlandish
And all I did
accusations
was
against
ask
Israel,
what fucking colour of your
and
shoes
its
are.
fourth request for provisional
Fuck's sake.
measures
What colour of your
is
shoes?
replete
Oh,
with
you
blatant
see,
distortions
oh,
and
the sun, the
misrepresentation.
shop,
heard
the
plenty
sun
such
was shining in
outrageous
the shop, and then
distortions
shop,
and
well, it was
misrepresentations
closed, and
yesterday
then I
as
went to
well.
this, oh, fuck, what colour of your
Perhaps most
fucking
repugnant
shoes?
is South Africa's
Well,
suggestion
you
that
see, you
Israel has
know, the
created
shop, and then the sun
zone
was
of
shining in the
extermination.
shop, and then...
evoking terminology
Fucking hell, man, Jew
reminiscent
McJewstein,
of the
spit it
systematic
out, man.
extermination of European Jews during the Holocaust.
I don't want to fall asleep
Similarly
live on here
outrageous
again.
is South Africa's cynical attempt to equate
This is a
Israel's
joke.
action
It's funny,
with
but it's a
the
joke.
genocidal practices at Srebrenica. How low South Africa has stooped.
Whoa!
These
You call black
allegations
people
leveled at
low?
Israel
Jew
are
McJewstein.
patently untrue and emphatically denied. Like many of the claims in South Africa's application and requests, they lack any basis in fact or law.
Low.
South
Why
Africa
did he
claims
learn
that Israel has
French when he's
closed
the
critical
Jew
border crossings
McJewstein?
into Gaza, when this is blatantly untrue.
Blatantly?
It has claimed that Israel has failed to facilitate the provision of fuel for sustaining humanitarian operations and facilities.
Fucking hell,
This
man.
is also untrue. Ms. Kaplan-Turgeman will further elaborate on
Right.
these points
That
in
makes
a
some
moment,
eyes for everyone.
as
My
well as on the
daddy's
continuous
bigger than
efforts
your
that Israel
fucking
has been
daddy.
making to alleviate the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip.
Respond.
As Counsel for Israel noted before the court during the oral hearing on 12 January 2024,
GG,
a state
I swear
intent
to
on
God, right?
committing genocide
Apart from being
would not
still fucking
undertake
well pissed.
the
pretty
operational
sure
and the
I'll-
humanitarian efforts that Israel has
Pretty
taken
fucking
and
sure
is
I'll.
taking to mitigate civilian harm.
I
It
wouldn't want
would,
to
would
try.
not have delayed a ground
I
maneuver
wouldn't
for
want to walk
weeks,
in a fucking
urging
straight line
civilians to
through my
seek
life,
safer
right? Put it
space,
that way.
and in doing so,
But fuck me, man,
sacrifice
that is
operational
putting me to sleep, man.
advantage.
Like,
It would
I
not
talk
invest
shite for
massive
like good fucking
resources in
5-10 minutes, and
facilitating
then like, try to
humanitarian
listen to the
aid.
country. He's like, he's still
If
saying the
anybody
same
should be
shit.
told that enough is enough,
Mate, all
it
I
is
can
truly
think is,
South Africa and not Israel.
mate, you should
What
definitely
point
get
do
hair
we say
plugs
enough to
or
South
go for the
Africa's
fucking
repeated attempts
pep
to exploit the
baldy
provisional
fucking
measure
polish
procedure
that
of this
dome,
court
mate. Shouldn't
in
keep your
such a
fuzz.
vile and cynical
Your
manner?
fuzz is like you're trying to hang on to your
This
fucking
war,
hairline, which is
like all
gone,
wars,
buddy.
is tragic and terrible for Israelis and Palestinians.
Really?
it has exacted a terrible human
My
price.
bagels over here.
But it is not genocide.
It's not genocide over here.
I can only
We're
recall
just
once
making
again that
bagels
Israel
out of
has made
fucking
it clear
Palestinian dust
that if the
over here.
hostages were released and Hamas were to lay down its arms, the hostilities would cease, and has been engaged intensively in negotiations to that effect. Mr.
I'm
President,
not even joking. I think I could
members of the
still
court,
watch Bill and Ted and get a giggle.
South Africa asked this court to order Israel, and I quote, cease its military
fucking
operations in the Gaza
Watched
Strip.
a small clip of Night Rider the
South
other day.
Africa has asked the court to order the cessation of military operations by
And,
Israel in its previous request.
It's fucking
court
still good.
Has not done so. The court is well aware that to do so would mean that 132 hostages would remain to languish in Hamas's tunnels forsaken.
Right, all we need is that
It would
big
mean
black
that
cunt
Hamas
behind
would be
him
left
to bring out a
unhindered
big massive
and free
mobile.
to continue its attacks against Israeli territory and Israeli civilians, which it has a stated intention
Where the
to
fuck
do.
are they? Is this the UN?
It would turn the Genocide Convention into a sword rather than a shield,
Oh, come on, please bring out
and
a
would
prop.
strip Israel
Come
of its
on, you got
rights under
squeaky nose.
international law,
You get big
and
clown
Israeli
shoes.
civilians of its protection. Such a situation is both legally and morally untenable. For all of the reasons given in response to South Africa's earlier requests for similar provisional measures, the court rightfully rejected South Africa's previous request, and it would be wholly inappropriate to grant a provisional measure in such terms. The second of the provisional measures requested by South Africa repeats earlier requests it has made, either sufficiently covered by the various provisional measures ordered by the court or rejected in previous rounds. South Africa has not given sufficient reason why the court should now deviate from or essentially duplicate its earlier decisions. The third provisional measure requested by South Africa would require that Israel submit an open report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to these and previous provisional measures. As I have said, Israel has engaged fully and sincerely in these proceedings, despite the outrageous and libelous claims that have been leveled against it. It has submitted to the court 2 detailed reports. It has been forthcoming about the efforts it is undertaking, as well as the challenges it is dealing with to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It has made clear time and again its unwavering commitment to its obligations under international law. It has done this while the fighting continues and the citizens are still under attack. South Africa has responded with a barrage of requests. It has clearly adopted a strategy of dragging Israel to court endlessly, regardless of any legal undertakings by Israel. In these circumstances, ordering Israel to submit another report is unwarranted. Mr. President, that concludes my statement. I ask that you now invite Ms. Kaplan-Turgeman to the podium.
Baldy McBaldy Stein. Fuck's sake.
I thank the co-agent of Israel.
Wake up,
ask,
exactly. Fuck I thank the makers of my coffee this morning, otherwise my face would be in my cornflakes.
Mr.
Baldy
President,
McBaldy Stein.
members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the State of Israel.
Oh, it's really for. Oh
As
no,
you have just heard,
man, right?
Israel is still under attack. We are still counting more and more of our dead and attending 2,000 more who are wounded.
5,000 worth? Oh no, it's
No
about
less than
1,500.
132 children, women, and men are still held hostage
Men?
in unimaginable
fuck the
conditions
men.
by Hamas
What
and
are you
other
doing?
Palestinian militants in
Got a
Gaza.
mask. Right, I'm
Tens of thousands of Israeli citizens are internally displaced. Most of them have not
that's
seen
all
their
the
homes
porn.
in over 7 months.
That
Many
crazy-ass
have no
porn will do
homes
that
to
you,
return
man.
to.
It'll internally
The
displace.
very great effects of the horrific massacre of 7 October continue to ripple through our people and communities, who must not be forgotten. They too are worthy of international law's protection. Mr.
They
President,
too.
members of the court, I draw particular attention to the women still held hostage in Gaza.
Yeah, the vaginas.
Ms.
Save
Amit Sosna,
the
who was held
vaginas.
captive in Gaza by Hamas
Oh no, man! It
for
sounds like
55
Sakir
days,
Starmer.
testified recently that she was
I
physically
spoke
abused,
to little Jimmy
beaten up,
down the street.
and
He had a
chained to a
wooden
bed,
leg and a glass eye.
threatened
Yes.
at gunpoint, and forced to
Oh,
perform
yes. Was she
sexual
raped?
acts
Was a
on
baby
her
put in the
captor.
oven while she was raped?
Hamas refuses to release these women and all the other hostages it holds. It brazenly refuses to alleviate the humanitarian suffering that this war has brought
Yeah,
to
because
all concerned
Israel was
on
already
both
like
sides.
wiping them off the face of the planet.
It
So
has
why
turned
would they
down
give back
numerous
this little
proposals for a
chips that
ceasefire,
they still have?
and it continues to favor death
Right.
and destruction
I'm
as a
gonna
strategy.
go and get the sausage roll.
We heard nothing
I get a
about that
sausage roll
yesterday.
and a tomato soup.
In fact,
Booyah.
while South Africa made many outrageous
And
false statements
right,
yesterday,
hold on. I need to,
perhaps most striking was what it did not say.
because it's okay just now and then.
We have hardly heard the word Hamas, even though it is Hamas that has brought
I hear
about
Hamas every
all
morning.
the suffering and pain that we are witnessing, the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Honestly, man,
Instead,
see the
we sat
fucking
here and listened
noises
to
fucking
venomous
men make
accusations,
when they're fucking
to
shouting,
language
man.
that
It's
is so hateful,
disgusting.
so out of touch with reality
It's
that
almost
it
like
was
it's like
difficult to believe we are in a
you
court
obviously
of law.
get a bit of dick swinging
Mr.
in
President,
the
members of the
changing rooms.
court,
I'm happy to participate.
there is
But
no doubt that this war
there's
is
always
tragic
like dick swinging in
and
the
has
fucking
caused
shower
great suffering
cubicles as they
on both sides. Again,
who
this
can
is
fucking cough their
Hamas's
fucking
doing.
shit up. Fucking
South Africa provides
the
an
loudest,
account that is not
apparently.
only
Seems to be a thing.
incredibly partial, it is also distorted. But
It's
to
also
apply
retarded.
the law
That's out of
properly,
order, head. You
justice,
retard.
surely the facts must matter. These facts cannot but show that Israel is seeking consistently to abide by the law in the excruciating circumstances of warfare that Hamas has deliberately created. The blatant misrepresentation we heard
getting a bit
yesterday
triggered
cannot
with her
alter that.
pronunciation of Hamas.
For a start, South Africa claims that Israel has shut down the two main land crossings through which aid enters into Gaza, this being the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings, and that Israel has cut Gaza off from all humanitarian, medical, and other supplies. This is patently untrue. The truth is that Israel allows and facilitates, as it has been for months, the provision of more and more humanitarian aid to the civilian population throughout the Gaza Strip. It does so through a number of crossings on a daily basis. I refer the court to the map that is now on the screen before you and also at tab 5 of your folders. Contrary to South Africa's claim, the Kerem Shalom crossing has been in continuous operation since December 2023, with one recent exception between the 5th and 8th of May, when it was closed after Hamas fired at Kerem Shalom. Even though Hamas fire continued on 8, 10, 11, 12 May, and several times even yesterday, the crossing remained open, allowing more and more aid to flow in. This crossing has been the central entry point for aid for months. I know that South Africa has not only wrongly alleged that the Kerem Shalom crossing has been shut down, it also requested that Israel relinquish control over it. I hardly need to say much about this request, given that Kerem Shalom is situated on sovereign Israeli territory. As for the Rafah crossing, to say that Israel closed this crossing is inaccurate at best. Its operation was disrupted on May 6, and since then, Israel has taken active measures and has been in intensive discussions with Egypt, supported by other international actors, in an effort to resume the flow of aid. In the meantime, and in keeping with its consistent efforts, Israel has taken immediate measures to ensure that alternative paths are available for the continued increase in its provision of humanitarian assistance to the Gaza Strip. In this context, the Prime Minister of Israel convened 2 high-level meetings to ensure continued adequate response to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The Prime Minister instructed the relevant authorities in Israel to take immediate interim steps to enable increased flow of aid to Gaza Strip through other routes and sources. South Africa neglected to mention yesterday that the total amount of aid entering Gaza in the last few days is now once again increasing significantly. Indeed, on 12 May, a new land crossing was opened at Erez West. It joins yet another new land crossing, fully operationalized, on May 1st at Erez East, which together allow for the entry.
Do you think Hitler's spokeshole was this good? Die Führer is a really, really nice man. We are conducting our elimination of the big Noah's problem one by one. I'm going to Greg's. Anyway, this is Daily PoliTITS light. I wasn't going to put it on because I'm stuck together with blue tack. But where's my fucking flashbacks of the night before. Where's my sunglasses? Anyway, let's listen to Hitler's spokesman.
Operations of the crossing. The Israeli government allocated approximately $52 million United States dollar to the implementation of such efforts.
Motherfuckers.
We heard nothing about all of that yesterday. Aerial routes remain in operation so as to allow for direct parachuting of aid into Gaza. Such operations are undertaken almost daily, involving a significant number of states. Many thousands of aid packages were provided in this way by dozens of operations in recent weeks.
Oh, man.
The temporary floating pier off the Gaza coast, whose construction began following President Biden's declaration on 7 March 2024, begins operating today. It is expected to enable the delivery of approximately 2.2 million food portions per day by the World Food Programme. I should add that this location too came under Hamas fire last month while construction was underway. Further progress in relation to maritime routes was achieved last week when Israel and Cyprus adopted on 8 May technical arrangements which aim to facilitate the implementation of the Cyprus Maritime Corridor, about which Israel has previously informed this court. This corridor was already utilized even prior to the concluding of the arrangements, but they will further improve its operation. Is this what a hermetic closure looks like? Mr. President, members of the court, it is not difficult to see that Israel has been making extensive efforts over the recent months, together with various international partners, to increase the provision of humanitarian assistance throughout the Gaza Strip. There have been remarkable achievements. South Africa's complete disregard of this reality and this truth is as telling as it is alarming. Israel's extensive and ongoing actions have been detailed in the reports submitted by Israel to the court, most recently on 28 April. They have brought about a significant increase in the amount of humanitarian aid that had entered into Gaza. They are consistent with the decision adopted on 4 April by Israel Ministerial Committee on National Security Affairs, headed by the Prime Minister of Israel, and I quote, to increase the efforts to allow and facilitate the transfer of humanitarian aid for the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, end of quote, and to establish a ministerial team to, and I quote, implement the policy of the cabinet regarding the transfer of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, end of quote. The decision records that these steps are undertaken further to the recommendations of security and foreign affairs officials concerning the need to continue the provisions of humanitarian aid to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. All of these steps have had a significant impact in alleviating the humanitarian situation and avoiding the catastrophes which South Africa threatened were imminent in December, then January, then February, then March, and then April. While the situation is constantly changing, Israel is adapting and continues to work to improve the humanitarian situation and to prevent harm to civilians and to aid workers. I note that, as Mr. Noam has said, Israel's actions in this context are currently under the judicial review of Israel's Supreme Court. These steps have been repeatedly accompanied by clear statements from Israel leadership. For example, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu said on 15 May that, and I quote, "Our policy from the start, from the beginning of the war, my policy was, you have to provide the basic humanitarian aid that is required by international law." But in the last 6 weeks, we actually changed it, not only to providing basic humanitarian aid, but flooding Gaza with humanitarian aid, end of quote. Israel's Defense Minister, Gallant, likewise said on May 1st that, and I quote, "We are taking significant measures in order to increase the volume of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This is essential," end of quote. He added that, and I quote once more, "We are fighting Hamas, a brutal terrorist organization. We are not fighting the civilian in Gaza, and we will facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid," end of quote. In order to show a genocidal intent that simply is not there, South Africa continues to distort other statements. In quoting the Prime Minister as stating that Gaza must not constitute a threat to Israel, they omit to mention that he was expressly speaking about Hamas and returning the hostages it took. When quoting the Minister of Defense as saying that the military operates neighborhood by neighborhood and will reach every location in Gaza, they neglected to say that he too referred expressly to Hamas. In the same statement, he also made plain that the humanitarian issue is a central one. While South Africa turns a blind eye to Israel's remarkable efforts, they have not gone unnoticed by others. The UN Senior Humanitarian Coordinator, who was appointed following Security Council Resolution 2720, said on 24 April in a briefing to the UN Security Council that Israel has taken a number of steps to improve aid delivery. When asked about her contacts with the Israeli side, she said that there is a very constructive cooperation with her mission. Senior government officials of various states likewise said they saw real and demonstrable progress in the delivery of aid. To say, as South Africa presently does, that Israel is deliberately denying humanitarian aid cannot be farther from the truth. On the contrary, Israeli actions undertaken in accordance with orders from Israel's highest levels of government show exactly the opposite. Only yesterday, no less than 365 trucks carrying humanitarian supplies enter into Gaza through the various land crossings. More than 330 of the trucks enter through Kerem Shalom, the same crossing that South Africa said yesterday was shut down. Other allegations about South Africa fare no better. Contrary to South Africa allegations, thousands of international aid workers have been entering and exiting Gaza. Deconfliction mechanisms were reviewed and improved following highly unfortunate incidents in order to guarantee that their safety is always maintained. These lessons learned, too, have been detailed in Israel's recent report to the court. Fuel continues to be delivered to Gaza, including this past Wednesday, when 76,000 liters were transferred to the World Food Programme. Times do not permit setting the record straight with regard to all of South Africa's outrageous misrepresentations. But the claim that Israel deliberately hampering medical services in Gaza, or that Rafah is the last viable location for medical care, cannot be left unanswered. Israel persistently continues to facilitate the enhancement of medical services throughout the entire Gaza Strip. In addition to the hospitals located in Rafah, efforts have been extended to support the rehabilitation of hospitals elsewhere in the territory. This may be seen at tab 6 of your folders. In fact, 14 hospitals are in operation outside Rafah. 8 field hospitals are in full operation, with only 2 of them located in Rafah. A field hospital, which was established by the ICRC in the Al-Muasi area, began operating as recently as 9 May. 1 more field hospital is due to open later this month, and the establishment of 4 more field hospitals is currently under consideration. Mobile clinics continue to operate in the Al-Muasi area too. Collaboration with a host of international actors, including the World Health Organization, continues in order to strengthen and expand medical care all over. South Africa would do well to tell its ally, Hamas, to stop exploiting hospitals and other protected sites as military command centers. And since we heard grave misrepresentation yesterday about the Shifa hospital, it must be made clear that even during very intense fighting in the Shifa hospital, after Hamas reinstated the hospital compound as a military hub, the IDF took proactive steps aid to ensure continuous medical care to patients hospitalized there. Despite the intense military activity on the premises, no patients or medical staff were harmed during the operation by the IDF. On 22nd March 2024, the IDF brought into the hospital in the course of its operational activity trucks carrying medical equipment, food and water, including over 10,000 units of medicine, hundreds of painkiller packages, over 100 packages of bandage and IVs, and dozens of advanced medical monitoring devices. Contrary to the impression that South Africa sought to leave you with, the IDF Chief of Staff said to the forces on that location that, and I quote, "We do everything not to harm patients, not to harm medical staff. In this operation, not one medical staff was harmed, no patients were harmed, and many terrorists were killed and captured," end of quote. He said that the hospital is not a safe place, not safe for terrorists. South Africa even saw fit to present to the court a false translation in its attempt to create intent. The soldiers in the video shown yesterday were not saying to destroy, but to dismantle Rafah, a clear reference to Hamas capabilities. South Africa ignores any such statements that show Israel's true intention. It had to distort the facts to sustain its label of genocide in such repugnant terms as final stages and extermination zones. Israel continues to take extraordinary measures in order to minimize harm to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. These have been described at length to the court in the previous hearing and in our written submission, and ignored to the same extent by South Africa. Time permits only several examples, one of which is that Israel has sent over 15 million text messages informing civilians of planned IDF activity in specific areas so that they can avoid them. It has made over 18 million pre-recorded phone calls and an additional 100,000 individual phone calls alerting individuals of danger in their vicinity. Over 9 million leaflets dropped over specific areas have provided civilians with information as to where humanitarian aid may be accessed and how to leave zone of combat. Once again, is this our military set on total or partial destruction of people operates? It is also the Israeli military that has put in place clear and definite procedure for targeting. This requires, inter alia, selection of munitions that would achieve the military need while minimizing civilian harm, and the conduct for each and every strike of a proportionality assessment in accordance with international humanitarian law. The IDF, moreover, marks sensitive sites, such as the medical service and shelters, on military operational systems, and takes additional measures to ensure that IDF forces are aware of them. All this likewise applies in operations in Rafah, as may be seen at tab 7 of your folders. While fighting to defend Israel, it is also engaged in ensuring that humanitarian aid continues to flow in. South Africa speaks of extermination zones, but the source cited in its request in support of these allegations does not say this, let alone prove it. It does reference express statement from the IDF Chief of Staff that civilians in combat areas must not be killed. An official statement by the IDF that the IDF does not define areas where anyone present could be shot. And a discussion of the IDF review of exceptional incidents where there are allegations of violation of this rule. Equally unsettling is South Africa's false allegation that the IDF uses artificial intelligence that decides who to attack, a claim the origin of which is one press report that is relies on anonymous sources. Unfortunately, South Africa did not tell the court yesterday of Israel's official response to the report, which states clearly that the claims are simply not true. South Africa's claims regarding IDF attacks procedures are also false. Mr. President, members of the court, if South Africa seeks to point to any change in the situation since your order of 26 March, it should have acknowledged all these remarkable humanitarian efforts by Israel. It should also have recognized the crimes committed constantly by Hamas and the circumstances that compel Israel to respond to them, as any state would. Instead, it offers grandstanding and rhetoric, no real evidence. That's just a transparent attempt to relitigate the same matter one more time and to extract more and more from this procedure. Mr. President, members of the court, even if South Africa could establish a relevant change in the circumstances, which it has not done, it has not established any change in the situation that would justify the extreme measure that is now seeking. The measures currently in place are entirely sufficient and no further ones are needed. As Mr. Noam explained, South Africa is trying once more to drag this court down a very dangerous path. It will have you say that a sovereign state that is under a persistent attack, whose citizens are held hostage in brutal conditions, cannot defend itself or its citizens. As you have consistently made clear, there is no international law to this effect. Indeed, it is inconceivable that there would be. Mr. President, members of the court, we must be very clear. Acceding to South Africa's request would be an affront to the very idea of the protection afforded by the law. For the court to accede to South Africa's request is to enable Hamas's battalion to continue to target Israel, to attack humanitarian crossing, and to destine the Palestinians in Gaza to perpetual war. Is to enable Hamas to reconstitute its forces in order to commit the 7 October atrocities again and again, as they have vowed to do. It is to condemn the hostages to near certain death, What would it mean for the women still held in captivity? Granting South Africa's request would be to side with a terrorist organization, which will no doubt celebrate any such decision. It is to legitimize, protect, and reward Hamas's despicable method of warfare to enable its heinous crimes to persist with all the consequences that might follow. Mr. President, members of the court, it is one thing to require that Israel abide by its international legal obligations and protect civilians when exercising its inherent right to defend itself. But to deny Israel that inherent right is a different thing altogether. It is unthinkable. Can it really be maintained that if hostages are brutally held captive in Rafah, Israel cannot come to their rescue? Can it really be maintained that if Hamas continues to use Gaza as a launching pad for its indiscriminate attack, Israel cannot defend itself against them? We respectfully submit that international law offers a clear answer to these questions. Mr. President, members of the court, on this basis and in accordance with Article 60, Paragraph 2 of the Rules of Court, I now proceed to read Israel's final submission. The State of Israel requests the court to reject the request for the modification and indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of South Africa.
Well, we seem to have been interrupted there at the International Court of Justice by somebody, not quite sure who, has interrupted the final statement to be made by Miss Tamar Kaplan-Turgeman. She's the Principal Deputy Legal Advisor of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel. Well, I think we couldn't go back to it. Let's just see those pictures. They bring them up. Let's have a look at what's going on.
Set of hearings, I would like to give the floor to Judge Nolte, who wishes to put a question to Israel. Judge Nolte, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, can Israel provide information about the existing humanitarian conditions in the designated evacuation zones, in particular Al-Mawasi, and how it would ensure safe passage to these zones, as well as the provision of shelter, food, water, and other humanitarian aid and assistance to all evacuees that are and can be expected to arrive in these zones. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Judge Nolte. The written text of this question will be communicated to the parties as soon as possible. Israel is invited to provide its written reply to the question no later than tomorrow, Saturday, May 18, 2024 at 6 p.m. Furthermore, any comments South Africa may wish to make in accordance with Article 72 of the Rules of Court on response by Israel must be submitted no later than Monday, May 20, 2024 at noon. This brings to an end the oral proceedings on the applicant's request for the indication of additional provisional measures and the modification of previous provisional measures in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. It remains for me to thank the agents, counsel and advocates of the applicant and the respondent for their statements in the course of these hearings. In accordance with usual practice, I would ask the agents to remain at the court's disposal to provide any additional information the court may require. The court will render its order on the request for the indication and modification of provisional measures as soon as possible. The parties will be advised in due course as to the date on which the court will deliver its order at a public sitting. Since the court has no other business before it today, the sitting is declared closed.
09:30 GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera English here, and the proceedings at the International Court of Justice at The Hague have just ended as Israel submitted its presentation to the court in rebuttal to South Africa's on Thursday as to whether provisional measures were required in Rafah and across the Gaza Strip with the ongoing Israel war on Gaza. Of course, there was a slight interruption in the final comments of the
DJ, I'm of the same opinion, man. Like
the last few minutes,
the 7th,
and the court had to kill the feed, so we're not quite sure what happened there.
It does go to
a extra and unusual question was asked by one of the judges, Judge George Nolter. He's from Germany. He's been a member of the court since February 2021, asking about the situation at Al-Mawasi. And of course, those individuals, Palestinians, who are evacuating from Rafah are apparently going to the safe zone of Al-Mawasi that we've been reporting on here at Al Jazeera the past few days. And he wants an updated answer to whether they are safe and what the conditions are like there. And he's given the Israelis, the president of the court, till 6 o'clock on Saturday evening to respond to that. So we'll be following that line of questioning very closely. Listening in to this was our correspondent at The Hague, Step Vasson, who's listened really to both sides of the argument, Step, and both presentations. A very different picture that Israel is painting from the one that South Africa did on Thursday.
Or just like people looking for the final solution for the Jews.
Absolutely, a totally different parallel universe, you could say. Israel is saying that what South Africa was telling the court yesterday were basically all lies. It was a misrepresentation of the truth, especially looking at the humanitarian aid. South Africa yesterday said that there is a very limited access, of course, of humanitarian aid, and that Israel has closed the border crossings, which is definitely hampering the access of aid. Well, Israel was just telling the court at length that they did everything at the moment to get humanitarian aid in. It was actually an exceptional operation, as they called it. They have spent millions of dollars to make sure this aid comes in. And if these border crossings were closed, and when they were closed, it was the fault of Hamas attacks. That's what Israel said. It also had really harsh words for South Africa, even filing this case based on the Genocide Convention against Israel, saying that, of course, there was no base at all for this, and that it's actually exploiting the court here, the International Court of Justice. So there were really, really harsh words. And instead of calling Rafah the last refuge for people in Gaza, as South Africa said, Israel said it's actually a Hamas stronghold. There are tunnels there, there are military coordination centers there. So that's the reason why Israel says it has to continue this operation in Rafah. And it says the court has no authority to decide on this because it's an internal matter. It's a matter of two parties in an armed conflict, and that's not something the court should get involved in.
It is interesting the way that the Israelis put forward their case, and it has to be said that, you know, while they talked about hospitals and other areas being retaken by Hamas and used as command and control areas, they talked about the 50 tunnels heading towards Egypt, but still provide no physical or photographic evidence of that. What is interesting, I thought, at the end of those proceedings, Step, was the additional question from the German judge asking about Al-Mawasi, because that is the focus right now, isn't it? About people moving from Rafah, moving to Al-Mawasi, apparently a safe zone, and either making a very long journey or dying along the way, either through exhaustion and starvation or being hit by Israeli snipers. They want an answer on that, don't they, by tomorrow, 6:30? How unusual is that request generally in sort of the proceedings of the ICJ?
Very unusual. We haven't seen that in this case at all in the last couple of months, and with the hearings that we've been attending. There has never been an additional question. And this, of course, means that the judges were not satisfied until this moment.
See all
with the
this stuff
presentation of
happening.
Israel. It didn't provide
Does it not
enough
make people
answers. And it's also
question
interesting to know that
the
Israel said that
folks
South Africa was giving all these arguments without having any access on the ground, which is, of course, is quite ironic, because that's exactly what South Africa is asking for.
Does it not make people fucking
that there
wisen
will
up
be
to
access on the ground.
the people with a dog in the
International observers should
fight
be let
to
in
run down, whether you
to
agree or
investigate
disagree,
what
like or
exactly is
loathe
going
it,
on.
that's
And,
not my point.
South Africa
But
has called
the
these
people who want to
evacuation
run
zones
down, for lack of a better way of explaining it, the old world order, the United Nations, the United Nations Security Council.
But that's exactly what you said. It's the very important, crucial question. And we're going to really wait and see what Israel is going to answer by 6 p.m. tomorrow evening.
For me, it makes perfect sense. You know,
in The Hague. Thanks
who
for
had a
coming back
dog
to
in the
step
fight,
throughout the
your
day
Alex
for more
Joneses
analysis of
and
what
whatnot,
was said in court.
what team they're
Let's
on,
cross over to
and the
Tarek
messaging
Abdul-Azim, our
and
correspondent
what
in
they've
Deir
tried to
al-Balah
drive home
in central
to
Gaza.
people.
While that presentation, Tarek, was happening by the Israelis, we were also showing live pictures of what's going on across Gaza right now. The Israelis are talking about crossings being open, aid going in, and everything's just fine. Yet there were huge black plumes of smoke hitting the Gaza Strip as their presentation was underway at The Hague. Just bring us up to speed on what was going on this last hour.
Yeah, bring me up to speed. Well, they don't seem to be doing what they say.
Well,
it's weird.
All what Israel has said was completely contradictory to the realities on the ground. They have been contacting with members in Rafah crossing. They have been confirmed that nothing has entered the Gaza Strip from Rafah and Karm Abu Salam crossing borders in terms of humanitarian aid. Only what get into the territory just before the Israeli military incursion to Rafah was one fuel truck to the UNRWA had been delivered, and that absolutely reflects how much Israel is working to face truth and to even to change facts on the ground as they continue their unrelenting circle of bombardment across Rafah and in the north in Jabalia refugee camp. Now, the United Nations have been responsible for getting all kinds of aid in the previous periods that were completely pre the invasion of Rafah, and we have been insisting on the fact that any potential military incursion of Rafah will be a big blow for all humanitarian efforts being made on the ground to mitigate the aggravating humanitarian crisis. And within the past couple of hours, more intensification of bombardment by the Israeli military in the north of the Strip in Jabalia refugee camp, as battles did not witness any kind of end till now, as the Israeli military is demolishing complete residential neighborhoods one after the other in light of their ongoing efforts to seize all kind of military control on the north of the Strip, as till now the Israeli military tanks are still surrounding the entrance of Beit Hanun town in the north, as bombardment continued as well in Beit Lahia town in the far northern western parts of the north of the Strip, amid ongoing hovering of Israeli military drones, as you can hear right now at the background in Deir al-Balah. This is where Palestinians have been told to seek refuge, and it's going to be a safe place for them. But yet, more casualties among civilians are getting into Al-Aqsa Hospital from different parts of the middle regions as bombardment there continued as well.
Tarek, Israel gives the impression that this is a voluntary move of those that are in Rafah, but this is really forced displacement, isn't it? They're warning people, you need to move or you're going to die.
Kill you.
Well, it's not only related to the controversial evacuation orders being passed by the Israeli military. They have been using this under intense firepower. It means that it's sending a clear reminder for Palestinians: if you did not leave, you will be killed, not you're gonna die only, because that is the military approach that being used by the Israeli military in the initial months of the war when they invaded the north of the Strip. Now they have been expanding the fighting to reach Khan Yunis, and right now ending up in Rafah. Families and civilians in the north of in the eastern portion of Rafah district have been receiving warnings to flee. They managed to flee. We are talking about more than 600,000 Palestinians fled Rafah since the beginning of the operation there, and at the same time there are still thousands of people in Rafah in the middle and even in the western areas of Rafah district, which is close to Al-Mawasi, and that's absolutely a very devastating scenario if Israel is trying to smoothly expand the military incursion of Rafah city, especially in light of more growing even warnings for people in the middle area, specifically in the vicinity of Al-Kuwaiti Hospital and the Shabua neighborhoods, as medics, as we have been confirming before, that they have been receiving calls by the Israeli officers to leave the area because hospitals will no longer be safe places, even for medical workers.
Tariq, briefly, I just want to ask you one final question, because we know that Israeli surveillance zone is in your vicinity. And based on what we've just heard at The Hague, I just want you to clarify for our viewers, are the crossings open or closed? Has any aid come in? Is Israel, in your opinion, and the sources that you're talking to on the ground, abiding by humanitarian international law and looking after the Palestinians in Gaza? And the field hospitals and mobile clinics that the Israelis just talked about in The Hague are fully staffed and have lots of medicine. Can you just briefly tell us what your opinion of that statement is?
Well, to make it clear, Sohail, now, both Karm Abu Salam and Rafah crossing are closed. Now, from the Palestinian side, the Israeli military is taking full control, as Egypt refused that Israel will be responsible for conducting and running a Rafah crossing, and they are calling for an independent Palestinian entity to run the border and to allow for further aid to get into the Gaza Strip. Now, Karm Abu Salam crossing is under the Israeli control initially, and they have been also challenged by the settlers' attack on aid convoys that are getting into the Gaza Strip pre-Rafah operations. But since the beginning of the operation, no aid gets into the Gaza Strip throughout the southern crossing borders of the Strip. In the north, there was a new point that Israel has made in order to allow for aid to get into the Strip, and since the establishment of that point, only a very limited number of trucks get to the people in the north. And since the expansion of the fighting and the new operation being launched in Jabalia refugee camp, no aid get to the people in the north. So what Israel has been saying in the International Court of Justice hearings is completely contradictory to what we have been going through and feeling on the ground. We did not see any aid get into the Gaza Strip. There was more growing appeal from the United Nations about the importance of reopening all crossing borders to avoid any kind of famine could be looming at the horizon. And mainly Palestinians are grappling now to get food. What only get into the Gaza Strip are 52 commercial trucks that were inserted to the territory in coordination with the Israeli side. They're all gone to the private sector, and they are right now sold in the Palestinian market with the skyrocketing prices. So that's all the reality on the ground, as Palestinians till this very moment are struggling in order to get their basics, life-saving supplies. And they are saying that the new maritime and floating dock
noise away,
could not
man.
be
That's
a proper, effective
horrible
alternative for land routes that could be more helpful.
It's like having a fucking hairdryer inside your fucking nut.
Ed, thanks very much, Tariq.
Thank you very much. Get that.
Check in with you later in the day as well. Joining us in the studio again is Mark Owen Jones, Associate Professor of Middle East Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University. You were also listening in to what was being said.
Still got the drone sound buzzing in my ear.
Drone in your ear. Yeah, it's pretty daunting and disconcerting as well every time we hear it with our correspondents on the ground. There's a lot to discuss, I suppose, really, but if we can just talk about the contradictions that we just heard. I'd like to start with Gilad Noam, who talked about aid going into the area, that these trucks and convoys are protected by the Israelis. We just saw images there on the TV of settlers destroying all of the aid that's going in and does go in. I'd like to know where that protection is and where they get those facts and figures from, and that he was very clear that the crossings are open and everything's okay. I was lost for words when I heard him say that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty clear that, firstly, that the Israeli defense at the ICJ is essentially a propaganda attack, right? They're using it as a platform to get out Israel's talking points, right? As you've just mentioned, that aid's going in fine, the medical trucks are well kind of staffed, and they've turned it into an ad hominem attack on South Africa, making the case, right? So I think they're using that as a platform, which explains why a lot of what they said it comes across as completely dishonest, because it is completely dishonest, right? As Tariq said there in Gaza, there is a difference in the reality on the ground and what Israel are trying to present to the international community. And I think, you know, the example of the aid trucks going into Gaza being attacked by settlers is an interesting one. partly because they actually mentioned it in the ICJ hearing, right? They said, oh, that event that happened on May the 13th, we are investigating it. So they're trying to give this illusion of this being an exceptional event, not part of the norm. But actually, what's really interesting, if you look at what happened on that day, where the settlers pulled down all these and destroyed these suppliers, you had Israeli peace activists there, one of whom I mentioned earlier was slapped by a settler. And she went to an Israeli policeman and said, I want to press charges against the settler who slapped me. What did the policeman do? He protected the settler by shielding the settler from her being able to take photos of him. So what that actually shows is that the police were not only protecting the settlers, but they were not intervening in a substantial way to actually help that aid go through. So it's all fine to say, oh, we're going to launch this investigation. But that's what Israel always do with these cases. Something bad happens, whether it's the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, whether it's a bombing, they say we're going to investigate to give this illusion of respect for due process. But the reality is always something different.
In terms of what you heard from South Africa on Thursday to what we've heard
Investigation
today,
and investigation
I think the discussion has been with all of our analysts and contributors to Al Jazeera. We're trying to find the pivot point that actually proves to the judges that special measures can be implemented. Do you think the threshold has been met in anything that you've heard so far?
Well, I think it has been. I mean, I think the fact is that one of the key mentions of the previous hearings was that there needs to be better access to aid and humanitarian aid. And as we've seen, the very existence of this American pier in the Mediterranean to get aid in, the closure of the borders. Remember, since the escalation in Rafah, none of the borders have been open, really. This is all indicating the fact that there is not enough done being to provide humanitarian aid. And not only that, we've seen some phenomenal events in the past couple of weeks or months, including, for example, the separate individual targeting of the World Central Kitchen workers, right? So we've seen these very deliberate attacks on aid workers, in addition to a prevention of aid being accessed, in addition to, for example, hospitals, people being told to evacuate from hospitals. Where here are we seeing an improvement of that situation, which is what the ICJ had wanted, right? If anything, I would say the tipping point has been reached here simply because it's months later and the aid situation is desperate. And numerous people from the World Health Organization to the UN have said that famine is imminent. We've been on the border of famine for a long time. It's imminent. It has not got better.
We showed pictures of it in amongst the conversation. Before I come to the question about the judge asking that last question at the end, I just want to bring in another contradiction. I mean, I'm no lawyer, but of course, you know, we learn as we watch these things. And the one thing that was startling in Ms. Turgeman's presentation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, she talked about the Hamas taking control of hospitals again, and she specifically mentioned Al-Shifa and said they had to retake Al-Shifa because Hamas had taken it as a command and control centre. In reality, what we know from our sources is that Al-Shifa was taken over with patients and doctors in that hospital for nearly 2 weeks. There was a 2-week siege. No humanitarian aid was allowed to go in. When the Israelis left, we're now seeing this uncovering of mass graves. And she said very clearly, we do not target medical staff. We know that Dr. Al-Bursh, who's the head of the orthopedic department at Al-Shifa, is dead. And he's dead because he was in an Israeli detention facility. So the questions arise is how does a 50-year-old professional medic become a threat to the Israeli state?
Well, I think we have to understand that the Israelis have never really defined what they mean by Hamas. And there's very good evidence to suggest that for them, any Palestinian male of quote-unquote fighting age is a potential suspect. And so I think what we're seeing here is, again, we have to dismiss what the Israelis are saying because a lot of it is PR and accept the fact that if you are a male, like a doctor, and you're seen to be aiding, civilians, you are a target, and a legitimate target. And we've seen doctors coming in from the US and the UK who've gone into Gaza temporarily and said the same things about how Israel treats medical staff. So Israel's explicit treatment of medical staff is also a big problem. And let's not forget, I mentioned the attacks on aid convoys before, but we've seen also, the fact that Israel have been attacking the people who are meant to be guarding those aid convoys, right? So, it does seem that there's a deliberate escalation of attacks on not only aid workers, but also medical professionals. And I think the medical professional you mentioned is one of several other examples of people who've been targeted for their work. Okay, so and the Shifa thing I think is particularly exceptional because one also reflects how Israel, despite having said that they achieved their strategic success in the north, had not done so. They're back in the north now, and so what does that mean? It shows that they're unable to actually get a hold or control of.
I've had enough dead bodies for one morning. All right, boys and girls, I am doing the off. Have a good weekend, Joe. I'm going to go and roll into my bed for a wee morning nap. Catches. Clips! And remember, citizens, always subscribe. Hit the notification bell as well. And $19.95 plus shipping and handling will keep you out of hell.